The transport shuttle touched down on Station Kepler 9 with a soft hiss. Lieutenant Amy Carter gathered her small bag and stepped into the docking bay. The air here felt different, heavier somehow, and carried scents she couldn't identify. This was her first time on a fully alien station, and everything looked strange to her human eyes. A tall, scaled creature waited by the entrance. Its skin was dark green and covered in thick plates that overlapped like armor. Sharp claws tipped its fingers, and its eyes were yellow with vertical slits. This was a Vraxian, one of the galaxy's most feared warrior species. "Lieutenant Carter," the Vraxian said in heavily accented English. "I am Coordinator Shalk. Follow me." Amy nodded and walked behind him through the station corridors. Other aliens passed by, some giving her curious looks. Humans were rare out here. The Alliance Treaty was only 6 months old, and most species still saw humans as newcomers to galactic society. They arrived at a large arena built into the station's core. The space was massive, with high ceilings and walls made of some dark metal. Training equipment filled the room, including weapons she didn't recognize and obstacle courses that looked brutally difficult. "You will observe Training Unit 7, Shalk explained. "These are young warriors, what we call cubs, though they are not children by your standards. They are learning combat protocols for military service." Amy looked at the group of 12 Vraxians standing in formation. Each one stood nearly 7 feet tall, with powerful builds and the same scaled armor as the adults. Their eyes tracked her movement as she entered. "You may take notes," Shalak continued. "You may watch. You may not speak. You may not interfere. You may not question our methods. If you break these rules, you will be removed and the observer program will end. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," Amy replied quietly. Shalk pointed to a bench at the back of the arena. "Sit there. Do not move unless you must leave. Commander Thraknor will arrive shortly." Amy walked to the bench and sat down. She placed her bag beside her and pulled out a notebook and pen. The cubs watched her with obvious curiosity, but none spoke. Commander Thraknor entered moments later. He was larger than the other Vraxians, with scars crossing his face and arms. He carried a long staff that crackled with blue electricity at both ends. His eyes swept the arena and stopped on Amy. "The human observer," he said, his voice deep and rough. "You sit. You watch. You do nothing else. We do not change our ways for soft species." Amy met his gaze but said nothing. She simply nodded once. Thraknor turned to his students. "Begin warm-up sequence Alpha." The cubs moved instantly, dropping into complex exercises that combined strength training with combat movements. Amy watched carefully, her pen moving across her notebook. She noticed how their joints worked differently from humans, how their center of gravity sat lower despite their height. After 30 minutes, Thraknor called them to attention. "Combat drills. Pair formation. Kresh and Vela demonstrate the strike and counter sequence." 2 cubs stepped forward. Kresh was slightly smaller than the others, with lighter-colored scales. Vela was among the largest, moving with confidence. They faced each other and began a choreographed combat sequence, moving fast and striking hard. Kresh's third strike came in too high. Vela blocked it easily and countered, which was correct. But Kresh's recovery was slow, leaving him exposed. "Stop." Thraknor's voice cracked like a whip. He strode forward, the electric staff humming. "Kresh, your form is weak. Your reaction is slow. You dishonor this unit." Before Kresh could respond, Thraknor jabbed the staff into the cub's side. Blue electricity arced across Kresh's body. The young Vraxian's muscles locked up and he fell to one knee, growling in pain. Amy's hand tightened on her pen, but she didn't move. She kept her face neutral, though her heart was racing. "Again," Thraknor ordered. "Both of you. Correct execution or you both feel the staff." The cubs resumed their positions and ran through the sequence again. This time Kresh moved faster, though Amy could see him still favoring his left side where the electricity had hit him. The training continued for 3 hours. Thraknor was not gentle. Every mistake earned punishment from the electric staff. Every hesitation brought harsh words and sometimes physical strikes. The cubs endured it all without complaint, their faces set in determined expressions. Amy sat perfectly still the entire time. She didn't flinch when the staff struck. She didn't look away when the cubs cried out in pain. She simply watched and wrote notes, her breathing steady and her posture calm. When Thraknor finally dismissed the unit, the cubs filed out toward their barracks. Several glanced at Amy as they passed. She saw curiosity in their eyes and perhaps confusion, The small human who sat so still, who showed no fear, who never looked away. Thraknor approached her bench. You have seen Vraxian training methods. Are you satisfied, human? I'm here to observe and learn, Amy said quietly. Thank you for allowing me to watch, Thraknor snorted. You show no reaction to our discipline. I expected your kind to be softer, to object to our necessary methods. I'm not here to judge, Amy replied. I'm here to understand. The commander studied her for a long moment. Return tomorrow, same time. Remember the rules. Yes, sir. Amy returned to her assigned quarters on the station. They were small but functional, with a bed, a desk, and a small bathroom. She sat at the desk and reviewed her notes. The Vraxian training was harsh by human standards, but she could see the logic in it. They were preparing these young warriors for real combat, for situations where hesitation meant death. The pain from the electric staff was temporary, while the lessons might save their lives later. But she also noticed inefficiencies. Kresh's problem wasn't weakness or slowness. His stance was slightly wrong for his body type, causing his weight distribution to shift poorly during the recovery phase. A small adjustment could fix it, but Thraknor only saw failure and responded with punishment. Amy knew she couldn't say anything. Not yet, maybe not ever. She was here to observe, nothing more. The next morning, she returned to the arena. She took the same seat. She pulled out her notebook. The cubs arrived and began their training. Thraknor led them through brutal exercises, and the electric staff cracked and sparked throughout the session. Amy sat quietly, watching everything, learning their patterns, understanding their methods. Days turned into a week. The routine never changed. Amy arrived, sat, watched, and left. She never spoke unless spoken to. She never moved from her bench. She never showed fear or disgust at the harsh training methods. And slowly, very slowly, the cubs began to notice her in a different way. Not as a strange alien observer, but as a constant presence. Someone who was always there, always watching, always calm. On the 8th day, during a brief water break while Thraknor left the arena to speak with another instructor, one of the cubs approached Amy's bench. It was Kresh, the one who struggled most often with the drills. Human, he said quietly, his English rough but understandable. You watch us every day. You never look afraid. Why? Amy looked up at him. Fear wouldn't help me learn. I'm here to understand your training methods. You never flinch when Instructor Thraknor uses the staff. No, Amy agreed simply. Kresh tilted his head, studying her. That is strange to us. Most species show fear of pain even when it's not their own pain. I respect what you're going through, Amy said. Flinching would be disrespectful to your effort. The young Vraxian stood there for another moment, then nodded slowly and returned to his unit. Amy went back to her notes, but something had changed. The first word had been spoken, the first connection made, and Amy continued to sit quietly, watching, waiting, and learning far more than anyone realized. 3 weeks had passed since Amy started observing Training Unit 7. She had filled 2 notebooks with detailed observations, diagrams of combat sequences, and notes about each cub's individual style. Her daily routine never varied. Arrive at dawn, sit on the bench, watch in silence, return to her quarters at dusk. The cubs had grown accustomed to her presence. Some still stole glances at her during drills, but most seemed to accept her as part of the arena itself, like the equipment or the walls. Thraknor continued his brutal training methods, and Amy continued to observe without reaction. She had started to see patterns that others might miss. Kresh wasn't weak or slow. His hip rotation was wrong for his leg length, causing his entire kinetic chain to misalign during strikes. Vela was incredibly strong, but sometimes overcommitted to attacks, leaving small openings a skilled opponent could exploit. A cub named Dex had excellent reflexes but poor breathing control, which tired him faster than necessary. Amy kept these observations to herself. She had no authority to teach, no permission to speak. She was just there to watch. One afternoon, during the brief rest period while Thraknor attended to administrative duties, Vela walked over to Amy's bench. The large cub stood there for a moment, then spoke. You write much in your book, human. What do you write about us? Amy looked up at her. I write what I see. Movement patterns, training sequences, how your instructor teaches different techniques. You have watched us for many weeks now, Vela said. In Vraxian culture, such attention usually means evaluation. Are you evaluating us? I'm trying to understand your combat system, Amy replied honestly. Your species moves differently than humans. Your strength and speed are greater. I'm learning how you use those advantages. Another cub, a smaller one named Rix, had drifted closer to listen. Do humans train differently? Amy nodded. Very differently. We're weaker and slower than Vraxians, so we focus on efficiency and leverage. We try to use technique to overcome our physical limitations. That sounds wise, Rix said. Strength alone does not always win battles. Rix, Thraknor's voice boomed as he returned to the arena. Do you waste time in conversation when you should prepare for the next drill? Rix immediately returned to formation. Thraknor glared at Amy, but she had broken no rules. She hadn't initiated conversation, and she had answered questions truthfully without criticizing Vraxian methods. The training resumed with increased intensity. Thraknor seemed determined to push his students harder, perhaps suspecting that the human's presence was making them soft. That evening, as Amy walked back to her quarters, she found Kresh waiting in the corridor outside her door. Lieutenant Carter, he said formally. May I speak with you? Of course, Amy said, stopping a respectful distance away. Kresh looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. I have struggled with the strike and counter sequence since training began. Instructor Thraknor says I am weak and slow, but I do not feel weak. I train harder than others. I practice even when rest is permitted, yet I still fail. Amy considered her response carefully. May I ask you something about your training? Yes. When you execute the third strike in the sequence, where do you feel the most strain? Kresh thought about it. My left hip. It always feels tight, like the movement is fighting against itself. Amy nodded slowly. That suggests your stance might need adjustment. In human combat training, we learn that everyone's body is slightly different. The same technique might need small changes for different people. Vraxian training does not permit individual variation, Kresh said. We all must execute techniques exactly as taught. I understand, Amy said. But may I show you something? Not to change your technique, just to demonstrate a principle. Kresh looked around nervously, then nodded. Amy moved into a basic human fighting stance. In human martial arts, we have a similar sequence. Watch my feet. She executed a slow strike combination, letting Kresh see how her weight shifted. Now watch what happens if I move my back foot just 2 inches to the left. She reset and performed the same sequence with the adjusted stance. Feel how the hip rotation is smoother? Kresh's eyes widened. Yes. I see the difference. Your instructor teaches the technique correctly for most Vraxian body types, Amy said carefully. But you might need to adjust your stance slightly to account for your specific build. The technique remains the same, but your foundation might need to be positioned differently. That makes sense, Kresh said slowly. But if Instructor Thraknor sees me adjust my stance, he will punish me for deviating from proper form. Then you must decide if a small risk is worth potential improvement, Amy said. I can't tell you what to do. I'm only sharing an observation. Kresh nodded thoughtfully and left without another word. The next day during training, Amy watched as Kresh executed the strike and counter sequence with Vela. His stance looked almost identical to before, but Amy noticed a subtle difference in his back foot position. Just a slight adjustment, barely visible. The sequence flowed smoothly. Kresh's third strike came in fast and sharp, and his recovery was clean and balanced. Vela's counter came as expected, but Kresh blocked and countered in turn, completing the full sequence without error. Thraknor watched in silence. Then, surprisingly, he nodded once. Acceptable, Kresh. Your form has improved. It was the first praise Amy had heard him give any student. Over the following days, other cubs began to approach Amy during breaks. They never asked directly for advice, but they asked questions about human training methods, about how humans compensated for being weaker than other species, about the principles behind different techniques. Amy never criticized Vraxian methods. She never suggested they were doing things wrong. She simply shared human perspectives when asked, and let the cubs draw their own conclusions. Dex asked about breathing techniques. Amy explained how human soldiers used controlled breathing to manage stress and conserve energy during long operations. The next day, Dex lasted noticeably longer in endurance drills. Vela asked about defensive tactics for aggressive fighters. Amy described how human martial artists sometimes used an opponent's strength against them by creating openings through overcommitment. Bella began showing more control in her attacks, maintaining better balance. One by one, the cubs improved. Not dramatically, but steadily. Small adjustments here and there, tiny refinements to their technique that worked, with their individual builds and natural tendencies rather than against them. Thraknor noticed the improvement but attributed it to his harsh discipline finally producing results. He never connected it to the quiet human who sat on the bench each day, writing in her notebook and answering questions during breaks. Amy continued her observations. Now with a deeper understanding of each cub's unique challenges and potential, she filled more notebooks with detailed analyses, comparisons between Vraxian and human combat theory, ideas about how different species might learn from each other. But she never offered unsolicited advice. She never inserted herself into their training. She simply remained available, a calm and constant presence who treated the cubs with respect and answered their questions honestly. 4 weeks into her observation period, Rix approached her with an unusual question. "Lieutenant Carter, why do you show us this respect? We are students, lower in rank than you. You are a military officer of your species, yet you treat us as equals." Amy thought about the question. "In human military culture, we believe respect should flow in all directions. Yes, I'm an officer, but you're warriors in training. You endure pain and hardship to become better. That deserves respect regardless of rank. Instructor Thraknor says respect must be earned through strength and victory. Maybe both things can be true," Amy suggested. "Respect can be earned through strength and also through dedication, perseverance, and the courage to keep trying even when things are difficult." Rix considered this. "You are strange for a warrior, human, but I think I understand why your species has survived in this galaxy despite being weak." Amy smiled slightly. "We're stubborn, if nothing else." That evening, as Amy reviewed her notes, she realized something had shifted. She had come here as an outsider, an observer permitted to watch but not participate. But somehow, without planning it, without forcing it, she had become something more. The cubs trusted her. They sought her perspective. They valued her input, even though she had never demanded their attention or insisted on being heard. She had earned respect not by being strong or loud or aggressive, but by being patient, thoughtful, and genuinely interested in understanding them. It was a very human way of building relationships, and apparently, it worked even with alien warriors who valued strength above all else. Amy closed her notebook and prepared for sleep, unaware that the real test of these relationships was still to come. The message arrived during Amy's breakfast in the station cafeteria. Lieutenant Jake Morrison would be arriving that afternoon for a scheduled inspection of the observer program. He would watch one training session, interview Amy about her experience, and file a report back to Earth Command about whether the program should continue. Amy felt a knot form in her stomach. She knew Jake from officer training. He was a good soldier and a decent person, but he was also outspoken and had strong opinions about proper military conduct. The Vraxian training methods would likely bother him. She sent him a message. "Remember the protocol. Observe only. Do not speak or interfere. This is crucial." His response came quickly. "Understood. See you soon." That afternoon, Amy met Jake at the docking bay. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with short brown hair and sharp blue eyes. He smiled when he saw her and pulled her into a quick hug. "Amy, you look good. This assignment seems to be treating you well. It's been educational," she said carefully. "Before we go to the arena, I need to brief you on Vraxian culture and training expectations." They sat in a quiet corridor and Amy explained everything. The harsh discipline, the electric staff, the physical punishment for mistakes. She emphasized that this was normal for Vraxian culture, that the cubs accepted it as necessary preparation for combat. Jake listened with a deepening frown. "That sounds like abuse, not training." "By human standards, maybe," Amy said. "But we're not here to judge. We're here to learn and build understanding with an allied species. Please, Jake, just watch. Don't react. Don't comment. Let them train their way." "I'll follow protocol," Jake promised. But Amy could hear the doubt in his voice. When they entered the arena, Training Unit 7 was already assembled. The cubs noticed the second human immediately, their eyes tracking Jake with curiosity. Thraknor stood at the front, his electric staff crackling with energy. "Another human observer?" Thraknor said, his tone disapproving. "Are we specimens in your laboratory?" "Lieutenant Morrison is here for a routine inspection, sir," Amy said respectfully. "He'll observe today's training and then return to Earth." He understands the protocols. Thraknor grunted. He sits with you. Same rules apply. Silence and stillness. Amy led Jake to her usual bench. They sat down and she pulled out her notebook. Jake had brought a digital tablet, which drew some curious looks from the cubs. The training began normally. Warm-up exercises, then basic combat drills. Thraknor was perhaps a bit harsher than usual, likely showing off Vraxian training methods for the new observer. When Rix moved too slowly through an obstacle course, the electric staff struck his shoulder. When Vela's form was imperfect during a weapons drill, she received a shock to her leg that made her stumble. Amy felt Jake tense beside her with each punishment, but he remained silent. She kept her own face neutral, watching and taking notes as always. Then came the team combat drill. The cubs paired off and ran through a complex sequence that required perfect coordination. It was one of the most difficult exercises they practiced, and mistakes were common. Dex was paired with a cub named Thorn. The sequence required them to move in perfect synchrony, attacking and defending as a single unit. They began well, but halfway through Dex zigged when he should have zagged. The timing broke. Thorn stumbled. The sequence fell apart. "Stop!" Thraknor roared. He stormed toward Dex, his staff raised high. "Clumsy, worthless. You endanger your battle brother with your incompetence." The staff struck Dex's back. Once, twice, 3 times. Each strike left glowing marks on the cub's scales. Dex dropped to his knees, growling in pain but not crying out. Thraknor raised the staff again and Amy felt Jake stand up beside her. "That's enough," Jake said firmly. The arena went silent. Every eye turned to the human lieutenant standing at the back of the room. Thraknor slowly lowered his staff and turned to face Jake. His expression was dangerous. "What did you say, human?" "I said that's enough," Jake repeated. "That level of punishment is excessive for a training error. You're injuring your student, not teaching him." Amy's heart raced. She stood slowly, ready to intervene, but unsure how. "You dare," Thraknor said, his voice low and threatening, "to question my methods in front of my students? You dare to challenge my authority in my own arena?" "I'm not challenging your authority," Jake said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "I'm pointing out that what I just witnessed crosses the line from discipline to abuse. The Human-Vraxian Alliance Treaty includes provisions about humane training practices. What I just saw violates those provisions." Thraknor's eyes narrowed. "You know nothing of Vraxian culture. Nothing of what is required to forge true warriors. Your species is soft, weak. You train with gentle words and participation awards. We train for real war." "We train for real war too," Jake shot back. "We just don't torture our soldiers in the process." The word torture hung in the air like a bomb. Amy saw several cubs exchange glances. Dex had risen to his feet looking confused and uncertain. Thraknor took a step toward Jake, then another. "You will leave this arena immediately. You have shown disrespect to a superior officer of an allied military. You have disrupted training. You have violated every protocol of your observer status. I'll leave when I'm satisfied that your training methods meet basic standards of—" "Jake," Amy said quietly but firmly. "Stop, please." He looked at her and she shook her head slightly. His jaw clenched, but he fell silent. Before anything else could happen, the arena doors opened and Coordinator Shalk entered with 2 other Vraxian officers. They had clearly been monitoring the session and had come as soon as the confrontation began. "Lieutenant Morrison," Shalk said coldly, "you will come with us immediately." Jake stood his ground. "Not until we discuss appropriate training standards for—" "Now, Lieutenant. That is an order from a superior officer in this alliance." Jake looked at Amy one more time. She nodded slightly, urging him to go. With obvious reluctance, he walked toward the door. As he passed Dex, he stopped. "You did nothing wrong, son. That punishment was not your fault." Then he was gone, escorted out by the Vraxian officers. The arena remained silent. Thraknor was breathing heavily, his anger barely controlled. The cubs stood frozen in formation, unsure what to do. Finally, Thraknor turned to Amy. "And you? Do you share your colleagues' opinions about our savage methods?" Amy met his gaze steadily. "I'm here to observe and learn, sir." "That hasn't changed. You did not defend him." "I'm not here to defend or attack anyone's methods," Amy said quietly. "I'm here to understand them." Thraknor studied her for a long moment. Then he turned to his students. "This is what happens when weakness is tolerated. When observers question warriors, when soft species try to impose their limited understanding on superior cultures, Let this be a lesson. Discipline is not cruelty. Strength is not abuse. And true warriors do not question their instructors. He dismissed the unit early. The cubs filed out in silence, many glancing at Amy as they passed. She couldn't read their expressions. Amy sat alone on the bench after everyone had left. She knew Jake's career was probably over. He would be sent back to Earth in disgrace. The observer program might be terminated. All because he couldn't watch in silence when he saw something he considered wrong. She understood his reaction. Part of her had wanted to stand up too. But she also understood that change, real change, couldn't come from force or confrontation with the Vraxians. Their culture valued strength and hierarchy too much. Any attempt to impose human values from the outside would only create resistance. Real change had to come from within, from trust built slowly over time, from respect earned through patience and understanding. Amy had spent 5 weeks building that trust with the cubs. In 5 minutes, Jake had damaged the entire program. She gathered her things and left the arena, wondering if she would be allowed to return tomorrow, and what would happen if she did. That night, she received official notification. Lieutenant Morrison had been removed from the station and reassigned. He was being sent back to Earth immediately. The Vraxian High Command had demanded a formal apology from human leadership for his disrespectful conduct. Amy was permitted to continue her observation, but barely. One more incident, the message warned, and the entire program would end. She lay in bed that night, thinking about Dex's confused expression when Jake had called him son and told him the punishment wasn't his fault. Thinking about how the cubs had looked at her afterward, perhaps wondering if she agreed with Jake's assessment. Tomorrow she would return to the arena. She would sit on her bench. She would watch in silence. And she would hope that the fragile trust she had built was strong enough to survive this. 2 weeks had passed since Jake Morrison's removal from the station. 2 weeks of tension and silence. Amy continued to attend training sessions, but something had changed. The cubs no longer approached her during breaks. They avoided eye contact when they passed her bench. The easy conversations that had developed over previous weeks had stopped completely. Thraknor had grown harsher. Every drill was pushed to extremes. Every minor mistake brought severe punishment from the electric staff. He seemed determined to prove that Vraxian methods needed no softness, no outside input, no human perspective. Amy watched it all in silence. She took her notes. She maintained her calm exterior. But inside she ached for the cubs who suffered under this increased brutality. She especially worried about Kresh, who had regressed to his earlier struggles. Without the confidence that small adjustments had given him, his form had deteriorated. He received punishment almost daily now. She understood what was happening. Thraknor was making a point. He was showing his students that the human observer had no real value, that her quiet presence meant nothing, that Vraxian strength was all that mattered. The cubs, caught between respect for their instructor and their memories of Amy's help, had chosen the safe path. They withdrew from her, focusing solely on their training and trying to avoid Thraknor's wrath. Amy didn't blame them. She was an outsider. Thraknor was their commander. The choice was obvious. On the 15th day after Jake's departure, the training session began with an announcement. Today we test your readiness for advanced combat protocols, Thraknor declared. You will demonstrate the complete battle sequence from formation through final strike. Every movement must be perfect. Every transition must be flawless. Failure will result in the entire unit repeating basic training from the beginning. The cubs tensed. Repeating basic training meant months of additional work, delaying their progression to actual military service. It was a severe consequence, one that would shame them all. Kresh, Thraknor said, you will lead the formation. If anyone fails, it will be because of your weakness. The responsibility rests on you. Amy saw Kresh's scales pale slightly. Being formation leader meant taking the most visible position, setting the pace for everyone else, and bearing blame for any mistakes. Given his recent struggles, it was a setup for failure. The cubs moved into formation with Kresh at the point. Amy gripped her pen tightly but kept her face neutral. The sequence began. The cubs moved through complex combat patterns, their bodies flowing through strikes, blocks, counters, and transitions. Despite the pressure, they performed well. Vela's movements were controlled. Rix's timing was precise. Dex's breathing remained steady, but Kresh was struggling. Amy could see the tension in his stance, the old problems returning. His hip rotation was off again. His weight distribution was wrong. He was fighting against his own body. They reached the critical portion of the sequence, a complex transitional movement that required the formation leader to pivot while maintaining defensive coverage for the entire unit. Kresh began the pivot. His back foot placement was wrong. Amy saw it happening in slow motion. The angle was too sharp. His center of gravity shifted incorrectly. He tried to compensate, overcorrected, and stumbled. The formation broke. The entire sequence collapsed as Cubs tried to adjust to their leader's error. Thraknor's roar shook the arena. "Halt!" The Cubs froze. Kresh stood in the center, his head bowed, knowing what was coming. "You fail," Thraknor shouted. "You fail your brothers and sisters. You fail this unit. You fail as a warrior." He strode toward Kresh, the electric staff humming at maximum power. The blue electricity arcing between the ends was brighter than Amy had ever seen it. "On your knees," Thraknor commanded. Kresh dropped to his knees. The staff struck his shoulder. Kresh's body convulsed, but he made no sound. The staff struck again across his back. Again against his side. The blows came faster, harder. Thraknor's anger was out of control now. His professional discipline crumbling under weeks of frustration with human interference. With the Cubs' earlier improvements, with his own inability to break them back to pure Vraxian obedience. Kresh collapsed forward, his muscles spasming from the electrical shocks. Small wisps of smoke rose from his scales where the staff had burned him. Thraknor raised the staff for another strike, setting it to an even higher power level. At this voltage, it could cause permanent damage. At this voltage, it was no longer training discipline but genuine harm. Amy stood up. The movement was automatic, instinctive. She didn't plan it. She didn't think about consequences. She simply saw a young warrior about to be seriously injured by an instructor who had lost control, and her body reacted. "Stop," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but in the silent arena it carried clearly. Thraknor froze mid-swing. He turned slowly to face her. His eyes were wild, his breathing ragged. "What did you say, human?" Amy stepped forward, away from her bench. Every eye in the arena was on her. "I said stop. You're going to hurt him permanently. This isn't discipline anymore." Thraknor's lips pulled back in a snarl. "You dare? After your colleague was expelled for this exact behavior? You dare to question me?" "I'm not questioning your authority," Amy said, keeping her voice calm. "I'm pointing out that you're about to cross a line. You're angry. I understand that. But Kresh doesn't deserve permanent injury for a training mistake." "You understand nothing." Thraknor dropped the staff and stalked toward Amy. "You sit in my arena for weeks, poisoning my students with your soft human weakness. You make them doubt their training. You make them question their methods. You are the reason this unit fails." He was close now, looming over her. Amy was small compared to a Vraxian, barely reaching his chest. But she held her ground, looking up at him without flinching. "I've only answered questions when asked," she said quietly. "I've never criticized your methods. I've never interfered with training. Until now. And I'm only speaking now because I believe you're about to do something you'll regret." "The only thing I regret," Thraknor growled, "is allowing humans into this arena." He grabbed Amy by the front of her uniform and lifted her off the ground. His strength was terrifying. She dangled in his grip, her feet kicking air. "Perhaps you need to learn proper Vraxian respect," he said. "Perhaps you need to feel what discipline truly means." He reached for the electric staff with his free hand. Before his fingers touched it, a low growl filled the arena. Then another. Then more until the air vibrated with the sound. Thraknor turned, still holding Amy aloft. All 12 Cubs had moved. They stood in formation between Thraknor and the electric staff, their bodies tense and ready. It was Vela who had growled first, but now they all vocalized the Vraxian challenge sound, the noise warriors made before combat. "Put her down," Vela said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes blazed with determination. "You dare challenge me?" Thraknor's shock was evident. "You dare threaten your instructor?" "We do not threaten," Kresh said, rising unsteadily to his feet despite his injuries. "We protect." "Protect?" Thraknor's laugh was harsh. "Protect this human who has corrupted you? This observer who made you weak?" "She made us stronger," Rick said quietly. "She showed us respect when she had no reason to. She helped us improve when she had no obligation. She sat in silence and endured watching your anger for weeks, and now when we needed someone to speak for us, she found her voice. You will stand down, Thraknor commanded. You will return to formation. You will, Alo, Vela said simply. Put the human down, step away, or we will make you. The threat was unprecedented. In all of Vraxian military history, Amy suspected nothing like this had ever happened. Cubs did not challenge instructors. Students did not threaten teachers. The hierarchy was absolute, but here they stood, 12 young warriors willing to throw away their military futures, willing to face court-martial and dishonor, willing to risk everything to protect a small human who had shown them kindness. Thraknor looked at each cub in turn. He saw their resolve. He saw their unified stance. He saw that they meant every word. Slowly he lowered Amy to the ground. He released her uniform and stepped back. You have all just ended your military careers, he said coldly. You will be expelled. Your families will be shamed. Your names will be struck from the warrior rolls. For what? For this human? For honor, Kresh said. True honor. Not the kind enforced by fear and pain, but the kind earned through respect and protection of those who cannot protect themselves. Thraknor stared at them for a long moment. Then he turned and walked out of the arena without another word. In the silence that followed, Amy looked at the 12 cubs who had just destroyed their futures for her. Vela met her eyes and gave a slight nod. Thank you, Amy said softly. But you shouldn't have— Yes, Vela interrupted gently. We should have. Some things matter more than careers. You taught us that even though you never said it in words. The arena doors opened again. Coordinator Schalk entered with a full security detail. His expression was grave. Lieutenant Carter, Training Unit 7. You will all come with me immediately. The Galactic Council has been notified of this incident. There will be a formal hearing. Amy walked forward to join the cubs. Together they left the arena, unsure what would happen next but certain that something important had just changed forever. The council chambers on Station Kepler 9 were far more impressive than the training arena. The circular room had tiered seating rising up on all sides, with representatives from a dozen different species present. At the center stood 3 platforms, one for the accused, one for witnesses, and one for the council judges. Amy stood on the accused platform. Her hands were clasped behind her back in a formal military stance. Around the room, she could see the 12 cubs of Training Unit 7 seated in a special section reserved for involved parties. They wore formal dress uniforms rather than training gear, and their faces were carefully neutral. The charges against her were serious. Interference with Allied military training, insubordination to a ranking Vraxian officer, incitement of mutiny among Vraxian military trainees. Any one of these charges could end her career. All 3 together could result in imprisonment and the complete collapse of the human-Vraxian alliance. Commander Thraknor had filed additional charges against the cubs. Threatening a superior officer, refusal to follow direct orders, conspiracy to commit violence against military personnel. The cubs faced expulsion, criminal charges, and permanent dishonor to their families. The head judge, a tall insectoid being from the Klixar species, activated the recording systems. This hearing will now begin. Commander Thraknor, you have filed charges against Lieutenant Amy Carter of Earth. Present your testimony. Thraknor stepped onto the witness platform. He had regained his composure since the incident, and he spoke with cold authority. For 6 weeks, I permitted Lieutenant Carter to observe my training unit as part of the Alliance Observer Program. I made the rules clear. She was to watch silently, never interfere, never question our methods. For the first weeks, she followed these rules. He paused, his eyes moving to the cubs, but her presence was not neutral. She spoke with my students during breaks. She shared human training methods. She planted seeds of doubt about Vraxian discipline. The cubs began to question whether our traditional methods were necessary. Their unity fractured. Their respect for hierarchy weakened. These are serious accusations, the judge said. Do you have evidence of Lieutenant Carter actively teaching or criticizing your methods? I have the evidence of results, Thraknor said. My students changed. They became less obedient, more questioning. When another human observer, Lieutenant Morrison, openly challenged my training methods, it was proof that the human agenda was to undermine Vraxian military culture. Lieutenant Morrison was removed and disciplined, another judge noted. This one a floating crystalline being. Are you suggesting Lieutenant Carter shares his views? I am suggesting that both humans came here with the intention of imposing their soft methods on our warriors. When I disciplined a student for a significant failure, Lieutenant Carter stood up and commanded me to stop. She countermanded my authority in front of my unit. She interfered directly with military training. And what happened next? The insectoid judge asked. Thraknor's expression darkened. The students sided with her. They threatened violence against me, their instructor, to protect a human who had poisoned their minds against proper Vraxian discipline. The judges conferred quietly. Then the head judge spoke. Lieutenant Carter, step forward to give your testimony. Amy walked to the witness platform. Her heart was pounding, but she kept her voice steady. Honored judges, I came to this station to observe and learn from Vraxian combat training. I was given strict protocols and I followed them. I sat in the same spot every day. I took notes. I watched. I did not criticize Commander Thraknor's methods or interfere with his training. Did you speak with the students? The crystalline judge asked. Yes, during designated break periods when Commander Thraknor was not present. The cubs approached me with questions about human training methods. I answered truthfully. I never suggested their training was wrong or inferior. I simply shared different perspectives when asked. Did you teach them alternative techniques? Amy hesitated. Lying would be easy, but it would also betray the trust the cubs had shown her. I shared observations about biomechanics and individual body types. I suggested that small adjustments to stance or position might help individual warriors while maintaining the core techniques they were being taught. I never contradicted Commander Thraknor's instruction. The head judge leaned forward. But you did interfere during the incident in question. You commanded a Vraxian officer to stop his disciplinary action. Yes, I did. Why? Amy took a deep breath. Because Commander Thraknor had lost control. I have watched him discipline students for 6 weeks. I understand that physical correction is part of Vraxian training culture. But on that day, he was not administering discipline. He was acting in anger. The electric staff was set to a voltage level that could cause permanent injury. Kresh, the student being punished, had already collapsed. Another strike at that power level could have caused lasting damage or even death. You presume to know Vraxian physiology better than a Vraxian instructor? Thraknor challenged. No, sir. But I know what happens when anger overrides judgment. I've seen it in human commanders, and I recognized it in you that day. You weren't teaching. You were punishing because you were frustrated with me. With the Observer program, with changes you couldn't control. And Kresh was paying the price for your frustration. The chamber fell silent. It was a bold accusation, but Amy had nothing to lose now. The insectoid judge studied her. And what did you expect to accomplish by speaking up? You knew it violated your Observer protocols. I hoped he would pause and reconsider. I hoped giving him a moment to cool down might prevent permanent harm to a student. I didn't expect what happened next. The students' rebellion, their protection, Amy corrected gently. They didn't rebel. They protected someone they believed needed protecting. They threatened their instructor. They placed themselves between an angry superior and someone smaller and weaker. That's not rebellion. That's honor. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The judges conferred again, this time for several minutes. Finally, the head judge spoke. We will hear testimony from Training Unit 7. The cubs will speak individually. One by one, the cubs approached the witness platform. Each told the same story from their own perspective. Vela spoke of how Amy's patience taught them that strength could be quiet. Rix described how her observations helped him improve without abandoning Vraxian techniques. Dex explained how human breathing methods increased his endurance. When Kresh took the platform, still bearing burn marks from the electric staff, he spoke slowly and clearly. Honored judges, I failed the formation sequence. That failure was mine alone. I deserved discipline for it. But what Commander Thraknor was doing went beyond discipline. I could feel it. The other cubs could see it. He was going to seriously injure me, perhaps cripple me because he was angry about things that had nothing to do with my mistake. And Lieutenant Carter's interference? She spoke up when no one else could. We are students. We cannot question our instructor without violating every rule of our culture. But she is not bound by those rules. She saw a wrong being committed and she found the courage to speak, knowing it would destroy her career in the Observer program. Kresh looked directly at the judges. We protected her because she had already protected us. For 6 weeks she sat quietly and endured watching Commander Thraknor's increasing anger and frustration. She never spoke against him, never criticized him, never complained. She showed us more discipline through her silence than we showed through all our training exercises. When we placed ourselves between our instructor and Lieutenant Carter, we were not rebelling against Vraxian authority. We were upholding Vraxian values. Warriors protect those who cannot protect themselves. That is the first lesson of honor. Lieutenant Carter taught us that lesson not with words but through her actions. The final testimony came from an unexpected source. Coordinator Shallock requested permission to speak. Honored judges, I have reviewed all recordings of training sessions since Lieutenant Carter's arrival. I have also reviewed medical reports on the Cub's injuries over this period. He activated a holographic display showing data and video footage. Under Commander Thraknor's instruction, the rate of injuries requiring medical treatment increased by 40% over the 6 weeks of Lieutenant Carter's observation. The severity of electrical burns from the training staff increased steadily. The Cub's performance scores, however, improved by an average of 23% during the same period. Shallock paused, letting the data sink in. This suggests that Lieutenant Carter's presence and her interactions with the students improved their combat abilities, while Commander Thraknor's increasing brutality served no training purpose. I believe the Cub's assessment is correct. Commander Thraknor was not administering discipline on the day of the incident. He was venting frustration. Thraknor stood abruptly. You dare suggest I acted improperly? I am a decorated combat veteran. You are also, Shallock said calmly, an instructor who allowed personal feelings to compromise professional judgment. That is the finding of this review. The judges deliberated for 3 full days. Amy was confined to her quarters. The Cubs were similarly restricted. The entire station seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the verdict. When the judgment finally came,